Right now, locked inside a federal detention facility in the Western District of Tennessee, Hernandez Govan is sitting in a cell. So what is actually happening to him in there? The treatment he is receiving, the brutal reality of daily life behind those walls. What federal detention really looks like for a man dragging the reputation he carries is nothing close to what most people assumed. Because this is not just another inmate. This is the man Memphis believes was the mastermind behind the death of Young Dolph. And when a name like that walks through a prison door, things do not simply return to normal. He does not quietly disappear into the system. The reputation follows him. The hatred follows him. And what we have uncovered about how Hernandez Govan is truly being treated inside that federal facility is something thousands across Memphis have been desperate to find out. But here's the thing you need to understand first. To make sense of what is unfolding behind those walls, you have to go back to where this nightmare began. Because this story did not start with the cyberstalking charge in June of 2026. It started on November 17, 2021, outside a cookie shop on Airways Boulevard, when 22 bullets ripped through the body of the most beloved rapper Memphis ever produced. It started with a $100,000 bounty, a tangled web of phone calls, a white Mercedes, and a Thanksgiving turkey giveaway prosecutors say was twisted into the opportunity to set up a culling. And as investigators spent years tearing that web apart, the one name they kept circling back to, the name they believed sat at the center of the conspiracy, was Hernandez Govan. A jury found him not guilty in August 2025. Memphis never accepted that verdict, and less than a year later, he was back in federal custody in a red jumpsuit and chains. So now the city that never stopped hating him is watching closely, asking one burning question above everything else. What is really going on with this man behind those bars? Is the reputation that has haunted him following him through those doors? Is the weight of being the most controversial name tied to Young Dolph's murder shaping how he's treated by everyone around him? We're about to break it all down, and by the time this video ends, you will have the complete picture. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. If you're new here, we dig deep into stories the culture won't stop talking about. Today, we're going all the way in on Hernandez Govan, the prison treatment, the federal charges, the public hatred, and everything Memphis still cannot let go of. Let's get into it. Hernandez Govan was not a household name before November of 2022. He was not a rapper, not a record executive, not a public figure in any traditional sense. He was a 45-year-old man from Orange Mound, one of the oldest predominantly black neighborhoods in America, sitting right in the heart of Memphis. And when Shelby County District Attorney Steve Moy stood before cameras on November 22, 2022, almost exactly a year to the day after Young Dolph was called, and announced that Govan had been taken into custody, the name exploded instantly into the national conversation almost overnight. Moy's words were specific and severe. He said Govan had solicited the murder and set it in motion. That language was not accidental. Prosecutors were telling the public they believed they had found the true architect, not the shooter, not simply the man who drove the getaway car, but the person who allegedly set the entire operation into motion. That framing changed everything about how Memphis viewed the case, because by November 2022, 2 men had already been arrested and charged with the actual culling. What happened on November 17, 2021, outside Makita's homemade butter cookies on Airways Boulevard in Memphis, had already been etched into the public record. What remained, according to investigators, was the question of who gave the order, and Govan, they believed, was that answer. But here's where it gets real. To understand why Govan's arrest hit so hard, and why his acquittal and the federal charges that followed hit even harder, you have to understand what was lost on November 17, 2021. You have to understand who Young Dolph truly was, not just as an artist, but as a symbol of everything Memphis believed was possible. Adolph Robert Thornton Jr. was born on July 27, 1985, in Chicago, Illinois. But Memphis claimed him from the time he was a toddler, when his family relocated to the Castalia Heights neighborhood in South Memphis. Castalia is not a neighborhood history has been kind to. It sits in a part of the city that has endured decades of disinvestment, poverty, and violence. It is the kind of place many people try to leave behind. Dolph never tried to hide where he came from. He wore it like armor. He started releasing music in 2008, handing out his debut mixtape, Paper Route Campaign, almost literally off the street corners. That title was not just branding, it was a declaration. He was building something. He formally launched Paper Route Empire as an independent label in 2010, drawing direct inspiration from Southern music moguls like Master P. Men, who proved you did not have to hand control of your art to a major label in order to build an empire. And the work ethic that followed was staggering. Through a relentless string of mixtapes, high-class street music, South Memphis Kingpin, American Gangster, Welcome to Dolph World, he built a following that was fiercely loyal because it was authentically earned. His debut studio album, King of Memphis, dropped in February 2016 and cracked the top 50 of the Billboard 200 without the promotional machinery of a major label behind it. By 2018, he had been offered a $22 million label deal and turned it down flat. Let that sit for a second. $22 million? He looked at it and said no, because his independence was worth more. His fifth studio album, Rich Slave, released in 2020, peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200, an extraordinary commercial achievement for an artist who retained full ownership of his entire catalog under his own imprint. Between Young Dolph and his artist Key Glock, whom he signed to Paper Route Empire after spotting his talent at family gatherings, the label racked up multiple platinum and gold certifications. Billboard recognized the label twice on its Indie Power Players list, in 2020 and 2022. But beyond the charts and the certifications, what Memphis connected to most deeply was the man behind the music. In November 2021, Dolph was back in the city doing what he did every year around the holidays, organizing turkey giveaways for families who needed it, visiting community churches and neighborhood spots, showing up not as a celebrity doing a photo opportunity, but as a man who genuinely believed in giving back to the place that raised him. 2 days before his death, he visited West Cancer Center in Germantown, a suburb of Memphis, to personally thank the clinical staff there for caring for a family member. That visit was unannounced. That was not a press release moment. That was simply who he was. And on November 17, 2021, he stopped by Makita's Homemade Butter Cookies on Airways Boulevard, a beloved family-owned bakery known across the city for its butter cookies and banana pudding. He had recently promoted the shop on his own Instagram. He was buying cookies in broad daylight in his own city, surrounded by the community he loved. That is where they took his life. 2 men stepped out of a white Mercedes-Benz and opened fire. Young Dolph was struck 22 times. He was pronounced dead at the scene. He was only 36 years old.
Rapper Young Dolph was shot and killed at a bakery today. Young Dolph, whose real name is Adolph Robert Thornton Jr., was reportedly buying cookies at this bakery in his hometown when someone drove up and shot him. He was expected to give out turkeys for Thanksgiving on Friday. A county commissioner called his death gut-wrenching.
His partner, Mia J., would later say in a Rolling Stone interview that they were in a place of love, that they were ready to fully commit to each other, that the future they were building toward simply never arrived because he was ripped away in the blink of an eye. That grief did not belong to her alone. Memphis grieved collectively, loudly, and with an intensity that has never faded. Surveillance footage from the scene captured the white Mercedes-Benz, and Memphis police released images from that footage within days of the murder. Law enforcement began tracking the vehicle and its connection to individuals with known affiliations inside the Memphis hip-hop world. The theory prosecutors would eventually build connected the Cowling to an ongoing feud between Young Dolph's Paper Route Empire and Collective Music Group, the label associated with rapper Yo Gotti. Prosecutors alleged that Anthony Mims, known publicly as Big Jook, the late brother of Yo Gotti, had authorized a $100,000 bounty on Young Dolph, with smaller bounties placed on every Paper Route Empire artist. The motive, as prosecutors describe it, was a toxic mix of industry rivalry, personal beef born out of diss tracks, and what they characterized as Big Jook's desire to exact revenge on Dolph over years of public confrontation. In January 2022, Justin Johnson was arrested at a traffic stop in Indiana. Cornelius Smith Jr. was arrested in February 2022 in Memphis. Both were charged with first-degree murder. Both were alleged to be the 2 men who stepped out of that white Mercedes and opened fire. Jamarcus Johnson, Justin's half-brother, was arrested in June 2023 and pleaded guilty to serving as an accessory after the fact for helping the 2 shooters communicate while they were on the run. Justin Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder in 2024. Cornelius Smith who became the prosecution's central cooperating witness, delivered detailed testimony about the events surrounding the killing. It was Smith who testified directly about Hernandez Govan. At trial, Smith testified that before November 17th, he had no knowledge of any hits being placed on Paper Route Empire artists. He said Govan was the one who told him about the bounties and hired both him and Justin Johnson to carry them out. He said Govan supplied the guns for the killing, that Govan received a share of the payment for the job, and that Govan was the one who informed Smith and Johnson that Young Dolph would be in Memphis that day for the Thanksgiving turkey giveaway. According to Smith, Govan told them that was their window. Smith also testified that after the shooting, he met Govan at a local car wash to hand over his phone and collect money for a car cover. Angela Arnold, Smith's girlfriend at the time, corroborated parts of this account. She testified that she drove Smith to meet with a man at the car wash after the shooting, and that she had picked Smith up from an apartment complex shortly after the murder occurred. Prosecutors reinforced this testimony with phone records. Those records showed dozens of calls and communications between Govan, Smith, Justin Johnson, and Big Jook in the days leading up to and on the day of November 17th. On the second day of Govan's trial, investigators presented a detailed PowerPoint to jurors mapping out the entire communication chain. Prosecutors also argued that under Tennessee's law of criminal responsibility, Govan did not need to have been at the scene or pulled the trigger himself. Organizing, directing, and expecting payment from the conspiracy was legally sufficient for a murder charge. Govan was arrested in November 2022 and charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. He spent 9 months in pretrial detention before his case ever reached trial. His attorney, Manny Aurora, a well-regarded defense lawyer from Atlanta who had built his reputation on high-profile cases, immediately went to work tearing apart the prosecution's foundation. Aurora's central argument at trial was simple and aggressive. Cornelius Smith was not a reliable witness. Smith had pleaded guilty to crimes connected to the murder and was testifying in exchange for leniency at his own sentencing. Aurora argued to the jury that Smith would say whatever was necessary to save himself, and that the cell phone records prosecutors leaned on did not, on their face, directly tie Govan to the murder conspiracy in any irrefutable way. Aurora told jurors the investigation lacked merit, and that the high-profile nature of the case should never be mistaken for the strength of the evidence. On August 21, 2025, after roughly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty. Not guilty on first-degree murder. Not guilty on conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Every single charge dismissed. Hernandez Govan, 45 years old, looked back at his family from the defense table with tears streaming down his face. He embraced his legal team. He hugged Shelby County Judge Jennifer Mitchell. Outside the courthouse, he spoke to reporters. When asked what he planned to do first, he said he wanted to hug his son. He said it was hard to put into words the feeling of finally getting his life back. He said it was one of the best feelings he had ever experienced. And then he told reporters something that quietly went viral across Memphis. He said he planned to leave the city for good. District Attorney Steve Moy publicly said he was disappointed by the verdict. Aurora, speaking to Rolling Stone, said the firm was thrilled with the result, but disappointed the prosecution ever pursued a case it knew lacked merit. He called it shameful that any judge signed off on warrants that left Govan sitting in jail for nearly a year. But here's where it gets real for the people of Memphis. A courtroom verdict and public peace are two completely different things. And in this case, those two things could not have been further apart. Young Dolph's impact on Memphis was never abstract. It was deeply, genuinely personal for hundreds of thousands of people across the city. He donated $25,000 to Hamilton High School in 2020 for new sports equipment. He organized turkey giveaways annually in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. He visited cancer centers just to thank nurses for caring for his family. He signed artists straight out of his own neighborhood and gave them real careers. He turned down millions of dollars to protect the independence that proved to everyone from South Memphis that you did not need to compromise who you were to succeed at the highest level. When he died, a street in Castalia Heights was renamed in his honor. His partner, Mia J., and the broader community continued maintaining the Thornton family's philanthropic foundation, pushing forward the charitable work he started, even after losing him and his aunt in the same devastating year. So when Hernandez Govan walked out of that courthouse a free man, Memphis did not simply say congratulations, case closed, move on. Commentary channels, social media threads, fan discussions, and community conversations kept the fire burning. Some people accepted the verdict on its legal terms, acknowledging that the jury had spoken after weighing the evidence presented to them. Others remained emotionally unconvinced, believing that the absence of a conviction did not answer the deeper question of what really happened and who was truly responsible. The case against Govan may have ended in acquittal, but the emotional verdict of Memphis was far more complicated and far more divided. Govan's own attorney at the time recognized that reality. Aurora's comment that the high-profile nature of a case does not make it appropriate to put someone on trial captured the tension between what a courtroom can prove and what a community truly chooses to believe. For a city that had already spent 4 years grieving, speculating, waiting, and tracking every development and every related case, no single courtroom outcome was ever going to deliver true closure. And then June of 2026 arrived. On June 3rd and June 4th, 2026, according to court documents later unsealed, Hernandez Govan allegedly sent threatening text messages and voicemails to a woman. The woman told investigators she feared for her life and the life of her child. According to the federal criminal complaint, the threat centered on a money dispute. The woman allegedly owed Govan approximately $540. According to court records, he allegedly called and threatened to have someone shoot up her home. When she called for help and the Memphis Police Department and National Guard reportedly established a presence outside her residence, Govan allegedly kept texting. The messages investigators say they reviewed included chilling lines such as "The National Guard can watch your house all day," and "I don't care about the police, National Guard, or nothing." He allegedly told her she would see the devil and that he was bigger than the devil. He allegedly threatened to post explicit content of her across social media. On June 10th, a warrant was issued charging Govan with harassment and stalking under state law, both misdemeanor charges. Memphis police arrested him on June 11th. He appeared in Shelby County Court on June 12th and was granted a $4,000 bond with conditions barring him from contacting the victim or threatening witnesses. He walked out. 12 hours later, everything changed. On the very same day, he posted bond in state court. The FBI filed a federal complaint against him. U.S. Attorney Michael Donovan confirmed that Govan was taken into federal custody under a complaint approved by a federal magistrate. On June 15, 2026, Govan was walked into U.S. Magistrate Judge Charlie Claxton's courtroom in the Western District of Tennessee, wearing a red federal custody jumpsuit and chains. He was arraigned on a charge of cyberstalking, a serious federal offense. Prosecutors argued he should remain detained because he posed a danger to the victim. A federal magistrate agreed and ordered him held without bond pending further proceedings. His next court hearing was scheduled for June 18th. The following week, newly unsealed court documents gave the public the most detailed picture yet of what federal investigators had compiled. The documents included screenshots of messages Govan allegedly sent the woman. During a federal hearing, a special agent with the FBI took the stand and confirmed the timeline. The complaint was filed Friday, approved that same afternoon, and Govan was picked up and placed in federal custody the next day on Saturday. Defense attorney Claiborne Ferguson, who is now representing Govan in this new case, publicly questioned the timing of the federal charges. Ferguson told local television stations he found it highly suspicious that federal authorities filed their complaint on the exact same day Govan was released from state custody on bond. He noted the federal government almost never files complaints first, since the standard procedure is to go for an indictment, and argued the sequence raised legitimate questions. Ferguson said one angle the defense was exploring was whether alcohol played a role in the incident, suggesting that as the day wore on, Govan may have lost control over his own decision-making. He also indicated that Manny Aurora, the attorney who successfully defended Govan in the Young Dolph murder trial, might be brought back in to assist with this new federal case. The federal cyberstalking statute carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison upon conviction. Govan, now 47 at the time of his federal arraignment, was held in federal custody at a federal detention facility in the Western District of Tennessee. Federal pretrial detention is an entirely different experience from county jail. Federal facilities operate under the Bureau of Prisons or local contract facilities and remain subject to federal pretrial services supervision. Inmates held pending trial on federal charges typically face restricted communication privileges, mandatory monitoring of calls and correspondence, and limited contact with the outside world. For a high-profile individual like Govan, whose name is recognizable to virtually anyone who follows Memphis news or the Young Dolph case, the dynamics of detention carry more weight. Other inmates, correctional staff, and the institutional environment itself are all aware of who he is and what he has publicly been through. While the specifics of daily conditions inside his particular facility are not part of the public record, what is documented is the federal magistrate found him a serious enough danger to the alleged victim to deny bond entirely, a bar that is meaningfully high inside the federal system. What makes this situation so layered is what it represents symbolically for a city desperately trying to close this chapter. Memphis watched Govan spend 9 months in jail awaiting trial for first-degree murder. Memphis watched him sit at a defense table while a self-confessed shooter described hiring conversations, guns, phone calls, and car wash meetings. Memphis watched the jury deliberate for 3 tense hours and return a not guilty verdict. Memphis watched Govan stand outside their courthouse and declare he planned to leave the city. And then less than a year later, Memphis watched him walk back into federal court in chains over a $540 dispute. That gap between the sheer magnitude of what he faced in the murder trial and the circumstances of his new arrest became its own source of conversation. Some people pointed to it as evidence of ongoing instability. Others, who followed his attorney's comments closely, saw the federal intervention as a continuation of institutional hostility toward a man who had just beaten the most serious charges Memphis could bring. What both sides could agree on was that the story of Hernandez Govan had once again forced Memphis to relive everything that happened on November 17, 2021. Real talk. There is something about certain cases that refuses to let the public simply accept the legal outcome and move on. A courtroom verdict resolves the legal question in front of it. It answers whether the prosecution met its burden of proof on specific charges presented to a specific jury in a specific proceeding, but it does not necessarily answer every question a community has been sitting with. It does not erase the emotional investment of years spent following every arrest, every court date, every piece of testimony. And when the case at the center of all that emotion involves someone as beloved as Young Dolph, the gap between legal resolution and emotional resolution can feel almost impossible to bridge. The Young Dolph murder case was never a celebrity death in the abstract sense. Young Dolph was not some distant figure to Memphis. He was their own. He grew up in Castalia. He gave $25,000 to a high school in the city. He handed out turkeys in the weeks before he was called. He walked into a neighborhood cookie shop and got shot 22 times in front of the entire world. The grief was immediate, raw, and communal. And every legal development in the years that followed, the arrest of Justin Johnson and Cornelius Smith, the guilty plea of Jamarcus Johnson, the conviction of Justin Johnson in 2024, the arrest and acquittal of Hernandez Govan in 2025, and now the federal charges against Govan in 2026 has been processed through that same grief. Paper Route Empire continues operating. Daddy O, Dolph's founding business partner and close friend, serves as CEO and has been recognized by Billboard twice on its indie power players list. Key Glock continues making music. Dolph's first posthumous single, Hall of Fame, announced exactly what the culture already knew. He was already in it. The Thornton Family Foundation continues working toward the charitable mission Dolph established in life, despite profound grief. A street in Castalia Heights carries his name permanently. For the people who loved him, all of that is real and meaningful. But they also continue to follow every single court update connected to his case. They read every article. They comment in every thread. They watch every piece of video content analyzing what happened, what was proven, what was never proven, and why. Because for them, the story is far from over. And when Hernandez Govan's name surfaces in the news again, regardless of the specific circumstances, the connection to November 17, 2021 is immediate and unavoidable. That is the weight he carries regardless of what any jury decided. And it is that exact weight that makes his current federal situation so much more than a simple cyberstalking case. In the eyes of Memphis, the city is not watching a random defendant navigate federal proceedings. The city is watching a man accused of being the architect behind one of the most painful moments in its recent history. A man who walked free after a jury acquitted him and who was back in a federal courtroom in chains less than a year later. Public opinion and legal outcomes operate in parallel universes. They always have. A person can be acquitted in a court of law and still carry the weight of public perception for the rest of their life. And a person can be convicted in the court of public opinion without a single piece of evidence ever being tested before a jury. What the Hernandez Govan situation illustrates is how these two realities exist at once, and how they feed each other in unpredictable ways. The legal chapter of his murder case is closed, but the public chapter never closed. Every new arrest reopens the first page. Every new headline pulls Memphis straight back to Airways Boulevard in November 2021. Every conversation about what happens to Govan inside a federal detention facility becomes, in the minds of many, a conversation about whether something like justice still exists in the aftermath of an event that felt so profoundly unjust. Young Dolph gave Memphis everything he had. He built an empire from the ground up. He turned down $22 million to stay true to himself. He came home to give away turkeys and ended up giving his life. And the city that loved him will be asking questions for a long, long time. That is the nature of loss at this scale. That is what grief looks like when it never gets a clean ending. Hernandez Govan is currently sitting in federal custody, awaiting further proceedings on the cyberstalking charge. His attorney has publicly called the timing suspicious and indicated plans to fight back against the detention order. Whatever happens next, Memphis will be watching, carrying the full weight of everything that came before it. So what do you think happens next in this case? Does the gap between what a courtroom decides and what a city believes ever really close? Drop it in the comments, fam. We read every single one. And if you want the complete Young Dolph murder case timeline, the video on screen breaks down every detail you need to see. Tap in.